It began with a stillness, not the comforting kind that precedes sleep, but strange, almost hostile quiet, the kind of silence that presses against your chest, makes the birds hush, and sends dogs crawling under beds. In the town of Elmridge, tucked between forested hills and rarely visited by outsiders, everyone noticed it, but no one said a word, not at first. Linda Carter, a 43-year-old nurse and single mother, stood by her kitchen sink rinsing dishes when she first felt it. The clinking of plates, the whir of the fridge, all muted. Even her daughter Sophie's cartoons seemed to lose their vibrancy. Linda narrowed her eyes at the window. No wind, no leaves rustling, just nothing. And then the power flickered. The emergency alert came in the form of a deep, grinding buzz from every phone, every TV, every radio. Sophie screamed and dropped her tablet. Linda's phone lit up with a red bar. Evacuate immediately. Massive geological disruption detected. She froze. Her mind sprinted to recall emergency protocols, escape routes, what to grab, what to leave. Outside, neighbours poured into the streets. Some crying, others shouting. One man banged on doors with panic in his voice. It's not just a quake, it's a rupture. The ground is splitting. The earth screamed. A thunderous, impossible crack tore through the air like God had taken a chisel to the world. Linda clutched Sophie and fell to the floor as their entire house jolted. Dishes shattered. The refrigerator toppled. The floor beneath them heaved like ocean waves. Outside, pavement crumbled like paper. Trees snapped in half. A massive crevice opened down Elmridge's main road, swallowing cars and parts of buildings. People ran, but many vanished in seconds into dust and shadow. Linda saw Mrs. Hanover, the old lady across the street, frozen in place with her hands in the air, as if surrendering to something unseen before the ground devoured her porch. By nightfall, Linda and a few dozen others had made it to the old high school gym, now serving as a temporary shelter. The town was mostly gone, cut in half by a black wound in the earth that seemed to breathe. No rescue teams had arrived. Cell towers were down. The only light came from lanterns and the dying glow of battery-powered lamps. That night, Linda heard it. A hollow moan, deep and inhuman, rising from the fracture. Others heard it too, but no one wanted to talk about it. A boy named Ethan kept whispering, "It's alive down there." His father slapped him hard across the face, hissing, "Don't start that. You hear me? Don't you start." Linda couldn't sleep. Her ears were tuned to that sound, the soft, rhythmic moaning that grew louder as the night stretched on. Then she noticed something worse. Voices. Faint, familiar voices rising from the chasm. She heard her late husband calling her name. She stood in the school hallway, flashlight trembling in her hand. The walls vibrated gently, like something was shifting beneath the foundation. Other survivors began reporting similar things. Dead relatives speaking, shadows moving where they shouldn't. One woman screamed when she saw her missing son smiling from the edge of the fissure. By day 3, desperation pushed people to foolishness. A few men, armed with floodlights and rope, descended into the crack to find answers. Linda begged them not to. She told them about the voices, the unease, how wrong it all felt. They didn't listen. They never came back. That night, something climbed out. It wasn't a person, not really. It wore clothes, yes, but its skin seemed wet and stretched too tight. Its eyes were black and bottomless. It moved slowly, awkwardly, like it wasn't used to limbs. It walked right into the gym, stood before everyone, and whispered in 100 voices at once. "You shouldn't have dug." Chaos erupted. People screamed, fled, ran out into the dark. Linda grabbed Sophie and sprinted toward the parking lot, but the ground rumbled again. The school began to collapse in on itself. Fire burst from unseen ruptures. As they ran, Linda looked back just once. The creature was watching them, but it wasn't alone anymore. Dozens more were emerging from the abyss, their mouths moving in silent conversation. 2 weeks later, Linda sat in a FEMA tent outside what used to be Elmridge. The town was sealed off, quarantined. Government officials said it was an earthquake combined with an underground gas explosion. Unprecedented geological instability, they called it. But Linda knew better. She saw the thing, heard the voices, felt the wrongness, and she wasn't alone. Others had seen them too, but they were all told to stay quiet. Last night, Sophie whispered, "Daddy's calling me again," from under the floor. And this morning, Linda's bedroom wall had a fresh crack running across it. She placed her hand on it. It was warm. 3 months had passed. The media had moved on, and so had most of the country. Elmridge became a silent spot on the map, cordoned off, but ignored. Linda and Sophie moved in with her sister, but the nightmares didn't stop. Sophie stopped speaking altogether. She just stared at the floor and whispered. Then one morning, the smell of sulfur filled the kitchen. A soft, sticky black residue oozed from the basement doorframe. Linda opened it slowly. From the darkness below, her daughter's voice echoed. Except Sophie was right beside her. The voice from the basement laughed. The authorities arrived quickly, but they couldn't explain it. Linda's home was now split, literally. A hairline fracture, just like Elmridge's, ran from her basement to the backyard. Thermal scanners detected heat, movement, and whispers. That night, as helicopters circled overhead and armed men patrolled the street, Linda sat alone in Sophie's room. A low hum vibrated through the walls. From under the bed came a sound like fingernails tapping stone. Linda didn't move. She just whispered, "I think it followed us." And from under the bed came the reply, "We never left." No one in the quiet coastal town of Rockport, Massachusetts, expected the sea to scream. It began just before dawn. A distant rumble rolled in from the harbour, deep and drawn out, as though something massive stirred beneath the ocean floor. Some mistook it for thunder. Others, like Peter Langston, a retired geology professor, sat upright in his armchair with a chill down his spine. He'd studied tectonic plates his entire life, but nothing in his research matched this resonance. It was like the world itself was holding its breath. Within minutes, tremors rocked the town. Boats crashed against the docks. Streetlights sparked and shattered, and the boardwalk split down the center. Peter rushed outside to find his neighbors crying, clutching each other as the beach groaned and pulled away from the waterline. The air felt thick, damp, and wrong, as if something ancient was waking up beneath the waves. The old lighthouse had stood for over a century. Until that morning, keeper Marla Jennings had lived inside it for years. She was cleaning the lantern room when the quake hit. The shaking was violent, but it was the silence afterward that terrified her. She looked out toward the horizon and saw the sea retreating, exposing sharp rocks and bones that had no place in this world. Then the lighthouse floor cracked open beneath her. She screamed as her foot plunged through the boards, grazing something slick and pulsing underneath. Pulling herself free, she stumbled out and found the sand around the lighthouse collapsing into perfect circles. The nearby cliffs groaned like something was pressing upward from within them. By noon, emergency teams from the nearby city of Boston arrived. But the northernmost mile of Rockport had vanished. Not destroyed, not flooded, gone. Where homes once stood, only flat sand remained, undisturbed and smooth. Families, pets, entire structures had been erased. And the strange part, the air over the missing zone shimmered, as if reality itself was bending. Peter, assisting officials as a consultant, noticed that compasses spun uselessly near the area. A rescue dog refused to step across the boundary, and when a drone flew in to scan from above, the live feed cut out, replaced with static, then a whisper, "It will come back when it's hungry again." The waters had returned by evening, but they weren't still. Fishermen reported entire nets of catch rotting within seconds. Divers found coral that didn't match anything native, smooth, black, and warm to the touch. One diver came up screaming, eyes bloodshot, saying he saw mouths in the rocks. Peter conducted a sound test near the marina. He dropped a hydrophone into the sea and played back the recording. It wasn't currents or marine life. It was a heartbeat, slow, deep, alive. On the third night, the town's emergency alert system activated without input. Instead of sirens, a voice spoke. The depths remember. People froze. Radios across Rockport repeated the same phrase in dozens of voices. Young, old, male, female. It sounded like the missing townsfolk were speaking. And it didn't stop. For hours, the voices muttered old secrets, childhood lies, confessions, names of the dead. One man heard his deceased wife's voice say, "You left me too soon." He clawed at the sand until his fingers bled. Everything began to decay. Photos faded overnight. Buildings aged decades in hours. Wood crumbling, paint peeling, roofs collapsing. People felt it too. One woman aged 20 years in a single night. A teenage boy forgot his own name. Peter realized it wasn't just a geological event. It was temporal. The town was being pulled backward, unraveled from time. The beach glowed faintly in moonlight, and those who stepped too close saw reflections that weren't their own, twisted versions of themselves standing still as if waiting. On the fifth night, waves began crashing inland with no wind, no storm, just violent, endless waves. But they brought no water, just foam, black, oozing foam that hissed when touched. From it emerged shapes, vague, shifting figures with no defined form. They moved toward people, mimicking voices, echoing regrets. When one of them touched a man, he collapsed into sand. Peter stood on the roof of Town Hall and shouted for people to get away from the shoreline. But most didn't listen. They followed the figures willingly, mesmerized by the familiar voices. They walked into the sea without a struggle. The town is quieter now. Only a few remain. Peter among them. He records everything, hoping someone will hear it. But the tides are louder now, even when the ocean is calm. The lighthouse flickers in the distance, though it hasn't had power for days. And sometimes, Peter sees people walking along the beach. People who were taken. They wave, and he waves back. But they don't come closer. They just wait. Rockport was never found again. Peter's home was old, built over 100 years ago, and like many in Rockport, had a cellar he rarely visited. But on the seventh night, he heard something scratching from beneath it. Not mice, not water, something steady, deliberate, like fingernails on stone. He grabbed a flashlight and opened the creaking door to the cellar. The air that rose up wasn't musty. It was cold, and it carried the scent of the sea mixed with something dead. As he descended the stairs, his light flickered. In the far corner, where only darkness should have been, stood a wet trail, leading to a newly formed hole in the foundation, and something inside was whispering his name. In his own voice, he fled the cellar but couldn't sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, he dreamed of the ocean floor, not as it was, but as it now pulsed like a giant living wound. In the dreams, Rockport's missing citizens were suspended beneath the waves, eyes open, mouths gaping, whispering into the currents. The next morning, Peter found a message scratched into his front door from the inside. We were never alone. He backed away, trembling, and turned toward the town square, where dozens of figures stood motionless, facing inland, their feet buried in sand. Some looked like townspeople, others were less complete. All were waiting, and Peter finally understood. The aftershock was never the end, it was only the invitation. It started with a silence that didn't make sense. A silence that was too complete, too sudden. No birds, no wind, not even the distant hum of traffic that usually whispered through the valley. Just silence. It was early spring in the remote mountain town of Grayson, tucked quietly into the folds of Northern California's forested ridges. Carl Weaver, a 52-year-old volunteer firefighter and retired contractor, was sipping black coffee on his porch, staring across the valley. The silence had pulled him out of his thoughts like a slap. He stood, scanning the horizon. Trees were still. The sky was a perfect dome of pale grey. A strange pressure built behind his ears, like being deep underwater. He stepped off the porch, crunching gravel beneath his boots. That was the only sound. The hairs on the back of his neck prickled. He wasn't alone in noticing. His neighbour Maggie, in her 60s, was already outside too, arms folded, her eyes wide and confused. "You feel that too?" she called out. Carl nodded. He didn't have the words yet, but he felt something. Something was coming. The earth gave a moan. That's the only way Carl could describe it. A deep, guttural sound that didn't come from above or below, but from all directions at once. Then the shaking started. It was slow at first, like a train approaching. Windows rattled. The coffee mug on Carl's porch railing fell and shattered. Maggie screamed. The ground rolled violently beneath them, and Carl was thrown to his knees. Trees swayed like they were made of paper. A power line cracked overhead and collapsed into the road with a shower of sparks. Buildings began to collapse with terrifying ease. The old post office crumbled inward like a dying animal. The general store's windows exploded outward. Screams echoed from every corner. Carl crawled to Maggie, whose leg was pinned beneath a beam. "Hold on!" he shouted over the thunder of falling wood and breaking glass. She was crying, nodding, covered in dust. "It's okay. I've got you." But nothing was okay, and he knew it was far from over. After the initial quake, the town was left shredded. Power was out. Cell towers were gone. The ground itself looked wounded. Cracks like lightning bolts tore through the main street. It took Carl over an hour to dig Maggie out, using a crowbar and sheer will. Her leg was broken, but she was alive. That alone felt like a miracle. They carried her to the volunteer firehouse, which had somehow remained standing. A few others were there, bloody, dazed, whispering in disbelief. Carl took charge instinctively. "We don't know how bad it is out there," he said to the small crowd. We'll need water, food, medical supplies, and we'll need to stay together. That night, no one slept. Aftershocks came every hour or two, like cruel reminders that the Earth hadn't finished with them yet. But it wasn't just the tremors that kept them awake. It was the feeling that something else had changed, something deeper. 2 days passed with no rescue. Carl led a group to the edge of town, hoping to find a working radio in an old ranger station. Along the way, they found the forest. Wrong. The trees were still, yes, but more than that. They looked burnt at the base, like something had scorched the roots from within. Wildlife was absent. Not a squirrel, not a bird. Just heavy silence, and the distant rumble of unseen landslides. They reached the station, and it was locked. Carl smashed the door in with an axe. Inside, dust floated in the air like smoke. The radio was dead. Every frequency buzzed with static until 1 second, a woman's voice cut through, whispering, "Don't move the Earth. Don't dig where it sleeps." Then it was gone. Everyone froze. Carl slowly backed away from the mic, chilled to the bone. No one spoke for a long time. That night, one of the survivors, Derek, a young mechanic, started screaming in his sleep. He thrashed so violently it took 3 men to hold him down. "It's under us," he shouted, eyes wild. "It's not just an earthquake." He was feverish, hallucinating, and completely terrified. He died within an hour. No wounds. Just gone. Panic took over the group. Some wanted to run, but there was nowhere to go. The roads had collapsed or were buried. Carl knew they were trapped, but he also knew they had to understand what they were dealing with. The whispers on the radio, the burning roots, the silence before the quake. This wasn't natural. On the 5th day, they ventured into the mountains. Carl believed the fault line had awakened something that had been sealed beneath the valley long before humans ever arrived. As they moved deeper, the temperature dropped. The sky remained a static, pale grey. They found a fissure near an old mine shaft. The rocks around it were blackened, almost melted, and it pulsed, not with heat, but sound. Low, rhythmic, inhuman. One of them, Janice, approached and began to convulse before she even touched it. Her eyes rolled back. She whispered, "It's listening," before collapsing. They dragged her back to camp, but her mind never returned. She just stared at the wall, murmuring nonsense. Desperation made people reckless. 3 survivors tried to descend the fissure the next morning, tying ropes to a broken steel beam. Only 1 came back. The others screamed for help halfway down, and then their voices just stopped. No echo, no fall, just silence. The one who returned said the darkness below moved like a living thing. He never spoke again. Carl decided they had to leave a record. If no one survived, someone needed to know. He wrote down everything in an old leather notebook he found at the ranger station. Descriptions, names, events. He buried it in a metal box beneath the firehouse, hoping someday someone would find it. By the 10th day, half the survivors were gone. Not all had died. Some had simply walked into the woods, drawn by something none of them could describe. Their faces blank, their steps slow but sure. Carl tried to stop one, a teacher named Ben, but the man just stared through him and kept walking. "They're calling," he had said. "They're underneath." Food ran low, water was rationed. People whispered about seeing things in the trees, eyes, flickering lights, dark figures that vanished when approached. Carl hadn't seen them himself, But he didn't doubt anyone anymore. In the final days, the earth trembled constantly. Not quakes, but breath. That's what it felt like. Breathing. Slow, immense, impossible. The town was sinking. Buildings swallowed. Trees toppled. Carl remained at the firehouse, watching the sky, writing, waiting. He no longer hoped for rescue. He only hoped it would end. He heard the voice one last time, not from the radio, but from the earth itself. You opened it, and then everything went silent again.